guests, and curious minds. Today let us delve into the intriguing case of bureaucrats turning into authors, a phenomenon that sheds light on the multifaceted nature of those who navigate the corridors of power and bureaucracy. The act of bureaucrat writing a book is not merely an individual endeavor, but often a reflection of a deeper engagement with issues, experiences, and a desire to communicate with the public in a more profound manner. So we have the pride to have three distinguished guests today. I would like to welcome them on the dais. And our today's topic is the interesting case of bureaucrats writing books with the speakers Dr. KP Krishnan, Sudha Krishnan, Ajay Mankotia, and our moderator for the session would be Mr. Arun Anand. Please give them a big hand and please come on, guys. So I'll just give a brief intro. Dr. KP Krishnan is an IS and has served for 37 years in various positions in the government of Karnataka, government of India, and the World Bank. He has been a strong researcher in academics. In parallel to his government career, besides being a visiting faculty at Bangalore, ISB, and Ashoka University, he held the prestigious book visiting professorship of regulation at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Our second honorable guest today is Sudha Krishnan. She serves as an independent director on the boards of SBI Funds Management Limited, IDFC Financial Holding Company, and Graphite India Limited. She has more than 40 years of experience in public policy and finance. She has worked on secondment at the Ministry of Finance and has managed various portfolios, including World Bank projects, writing memoranda, personal matters of the central government, and reports for the Finance Minister on enhancing the comprehensive effectiveness of government spending. Our third respectable guest and speaker today is Mr. Ajay Mankotia. He is a former Commissioner of Income Tax and Media Company Executive. Presently, he runs a tax advisory. He is the Independent Director of Jindal Stainless Steel and of MBS Limited. He is also Director on the Board of RSG Media Systems Private Limited and MBS Interactive Systems Limited. He has written a book, Bollywood Odyssey, released in March 2023, and he has also participated in the Ghaziabad Bhopal XCSOI Literature Fest. So to navigate smoothly this discussion, our esteemed moderator for the session would be Mr. Arun Anand. He is a distinguished author, journalist, and a columnist. He is the author of more than 15 books, including the bestseller Taliban War and Religion in Afghanistan. So, with this panel, since we are already short of time, I would request Sir to please start the session.
Thank you, everybody. I think we'll keep basically about 40 minutes for the conversation, then another 10-15 minutes for Q&A session. So, without going further into details, I think it's not actually what Snehal said, that probably it's not that intriguing in terms of the bureaucrats writing books. So I have a common question to all of you, that when you write a book, and especially I am taking that kind of book where it is more about, it's a non-fiction, and about especially the work which you have done or your experiences in bureaucracy. So when you write a book, who is your target readership by writing this book?
We answered by somebody who has written a book. Neither of us has written a book.
So, I wrote a book on my experiences in the tax department before this one, called There's 7 for You, 3 for Me. Now, the trigger for the book was very simple. I was undergoing a medical procedure many years back, and the doctor told me that he would give me an anesthetic shot, and it would be a little uncomfortable. So, sure enough, he gave the shot, and it was very painful. And then he asked whether it was all okay, and I said, no, it was very painful. And then he said that, now you know how we feel when we go to the tax department. So, that set me thinking. And, but what actually was the icing on the cake was I'm a member of a music group, so we meet regularly every month in people causes. So it was this lady's turn. I had to businessman. So I was introduced to her, and then when she realized that I'm from the tax department, she actually had a fainting fit. She started having palpitations and started sweating. She sat down, we had to give her water. And then when she recovered, when she was told that I'm a bad person, then she asked me a very bizarre question. Mr. Mankotia, how can a taxman sing? So these are the perceptions that people have in this country about the taxman, about the income tax officer. So I wrote this first book basically to remove those misconceptions. I immediately realized there's not a single book, nothing is known about what the taxman does, what the challenges are, the kind of work he does on a day-to-day basis. We all know about tax, but nobody knows about what he does. So I thought, let me use my own experience in the tax department to highlight what he does. Let him come to the center stage, let me put the spotlight on him. Let me remove the cobwebs of misunderstanding people have about what he does. And then show him as a person who does his work to the best of his ability. It's a very, very serious task. No one likes to pay taxes. So, he does that job to the best of his ability as much professionalism as possible. So, I said, let me just highlight what he does. And so, this book that came out earlier was a book to show the taxman, to remove all the myths about him, to bring him center stage. So the target audience was the public at large. Let them understand what he does, remove the awe that they have, or the fear that they have, or the contempt they have, or the loathing they have of him, and show him as a normal person who does doing a job to the best of their ability, and to also tell the public that they are the valuable customer. It's a service department, finally, it's not a government department anymore. They are rendering a service to you, you are the customer. So treat it as such. But don't be off him and don't condemn him. He's an officer doing a job. Pay your taxes properly, rightly, fully. There is nothing to fear about it.
Sudha and Krishnan, I have a common question for both of you. As bureaucrats you have served, so Sudha, when you write, when you see books written by bureaucrats, this is like one of the pure professional thing, but there are a lot of memoirs, and there are a lot of interesting details also which come out, and there are things which they say only which they are privy to. So how authentic? How to test the authenticity of that, or how because some of them are really contrarian to the general discourse which has been going on about that particular incident, and especially when people in the Prime Minister's office, who are working in the Prime Minister's office, when they write such books. So how do you look at it?
So thanks, Arunji. I'll try and answer the question. I haven't written any books myself, nor have I read too many books written by fellow bureaucrats. Probably because maybe I'm not so keen to know what happened in somebody's lifetime or in somebody's career and so on. You asked a question about how correct or how authentic are the views that are written in memoirs. Obviously, a memoir is one person's understanding of what happened to him and his experiences. It's written through the lens of an individual. So one has to see it as that and accept it as that. And if you really want to arrive at truth within inverted commas, as say journalists would like to arrive at, you have to put together a lot of other information, collate a lot of other information to test what is being said, and then decide whether this is in fact authentic or not authentic. It's very difficult to say whether it's true or not true because obviously individuals' views on events will vary. I'm sure if Krishnan and I were asked to speak about something that both of us experienced last week, we may have different perspectives on it. but that's the way this policy is, and we can't really, I think, change that. I wanted to say something in addition to what Ajay has just said about why bureaucrats write books, and I was talking about it with Krishnan over breakfast this morning. And I wonder why people are interested in what bureaucrats are writing. I sometimes wonder why would the general public really be bothered about what an IAS officer has done or not done, or what a tax officer has done or not done. And that's also perhaps something that one may like to talk about.
Thanks. Thanks, Arun, and afternoon, everybody. In one sense, bureaucrats also come from the same society, and it may not be a representative sample, but a lot of them are likely to be in a standard sort of routine academic exam sense. They're all likely to be high achievers. They've cracked the system, they know how to write. They certainly know how to write exams. And I think the larger question is, why do people write autobiographies? And journalists, people in power, in the sense of politicians, or journalists, professors, people who think they've led interesting lives or useful lives, I think all have a tendency to write what are autobiographical type accounts. Partly, I think, as explanation, partly, in my opinion, as apology, partly rationalization, justification for what they did, which a lot of the rest of the world may not agree with, and partly, I think it's also an ego grip. It's your own sense of the legacy, your contribution to the system, and I think all of which are valid as much for bureaucrats, civil servants, as for the rest of the world. So I don't think it's a particularly different answer. To me, it would be the same answer on why does a former Chief Justice or a former Finance Minister write a book. My broad answer would be the same. Having said that, as part of the same thing that Sudha mentioned, looking back, I am unlike her. I perhaps read most of at least the recent memoirs of public servants, and it's interesting that in that sense, Ajay may be an exception. A lot more of these autobiographical type accounts are from the Indian Administrative Service and the Indian Foreign Service. You will find a lot less from the other services, perhaps because in the public eye, the work that the IAS or the IFS apparently does seems to relate a lot more to a lot of our daily lives than, let's say, an accountant general who maintains accounts of the governments of Maharashtra, government of Gujarat. It's not a topic which is likely to excite too many people. It's very critical. It's very critical for governance, but it may not appeal to, let's say, an average person. Whereas the life of the Indian ambassador to the United States or a home secretary like Mr. Bodbole of Maharashtra cadre, who was home secretary during the time of 91, 92, tumultuous times for home ministry, perhaps is likely to be of far greater interest than my life as chief accountant of Mahanagar Telephone Nigam Limited. I think it's likely to be less interesting. That's my sense.
I'll just add to that. Of course, IAS and IFS, what happens there is of very, very great relevance to the people at large. But amongst the other services and the services, I think there's no other service besides IAS and IFS which touches the common man so intimately as a tax department. Not only the common man, but also the nation at large, because the policies that you can adopt to increase revenues, to distribute wealth in the country, to promote development, to promote savings. There's so many tasks which the economic department has carry out in the country. So it has a very direct vital connect to both the nation as well as to the common man. And that's why he also, I think, takes interest in whatever the economic department comes out in terms of policy and rates.
Anand, I wanted to ask you, is it a trip, as Sudha mentioned, is it a reduction, more of a reduction trip, because I have read, I review also. So is it a reduction trip for a lot of bureaucrats, especially when they are writing the autobiographical kind of stuff?
Hanji, to some extent, I would say it is redemption, because as Krishnan said, you're trying to explain or rationalize कि मैंने क्या किया, मैंने क्यों किया, मैंने कब किया, what were the pressures that were acting on me, and how did I, despite all those pressures, how did I take a decision that was sensible, or why did I take that decision which may have been sort of reported very widely in the media and so on. But to some extent, I also think, and I'm going back to the question that I actually posed, why are people interested in what bureaucrats write? Why do people read them? Because I क्यों बैठे हैं इस podcast to listen to this conversation? Because, as you said about both of them said, the glamour associated with the civil services. They have a certain social status. There is, it's like somebody has achieved something. So to some extent, I think these autobiographies are very motivating and inspiring to younger people. Last week, we saw this movie called 12th Fail. पता नहीं आप यहाँ कितने लोगों ने देखा था 12th Fail देखा है आपने? It's a very interesting story about, true story, about a young boy who's brought up in a village in Chambal. He belongs to a farming family, and against all odds, he writes the civil service exam, and by the way, he has failed in class 12. That's why the name of the movie is 12th Fail. So 12th में उसने 2 बार उसके he has failed. Third attempt he has managed to pass, if I remember right, to the 3rd division. And despite this, he comes to Delhi. He spends all his life savings. वो दादी उसको पैसे देती हैं, and with that he attempts over 4 years and somehow cracks the civil service. So these are not young people who are lakhs and lakhs of them who are struggling to sort of crack this exam and achieve that holy grail of civil service. So for many of them, these are inspiring stories. Other people have done it. They've come up from the ranks. This gentleman whose book has been made into a movie is also an autobiography, correct? But he's not written about कि मैंने क्या किया as perhaps not as a police officer. He's written more about his personal struggles and how did I reach where I am. So to that extent, I think they're also inspiring and motivational, and it's sort of maybe useful for many people who are attempting to try the same path.
Krishnan sir, I just wanted to ask you, do you see any pattern in terms of, because in other parts of the world also, bureaucrats do write, memoirs, and of course they write on the subject matters also, which they have read with. So, and especially diplomats, which I have seen. So, diplomats and people who have been involved in handling, kind of physically, probably counter-terrorism or international crime. How do you find basically? Have you read? Have you happened to read any of these books? And how do you find, as compared to Indian bureaucracy, the books basically which are being written here? So, what's your viewpoint on this?
Yeah, I read a reasonable amount of, say, accounts by former British civil servants, British civil servants come closest to us because they are typically mandarin, lifelong career in the government. Unlike a lot of the US, where it is they come in for specified periods, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and go out. So a lot of the UK writings typically tend to be less autobiographical, much more scholarly, meaning there is an element of my life, but there is a lot of this is the way the treasury functioned at this time, and this is not the way it should be functioning, and making research, scholarly type contributions on should we have done this in retrospect, should we have changed the policy, or should we have approached it differently. There are also a lesser number of when I was in so-and-so position, I did this, and a lot of stories. I was trying to recall, for my own batch, I belong to, we are all slotted in a particular year. So I'm 1983 batch, 82 exam, 83 batch. My own batch, I can recall 3 people who've written what would be classified as autobiographical. There is a gentleman called Taradat, who retired from Odisha, and very recently, it's a book which is still reasonably popular in Amazon and a number of these other publications. It's called We Also Make Policy, Subhash Chandra Garg, on his days in the Ministry of Finance. And some of it got sensationalized because people have quoted, without the context, conversations between Subhash Garg and the Prime Minister on what they thought about the then Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Mr. Ajay Mankotia. Then there is a book by another batchmate and close friend called Arun Anand, who took early retirement. All of them, and I can recall books by many friends, Mr. Vinod Rai, senior colleague, Mr. V. Balasubramanian, Mike Carter, Mr. Anil Swarup, whose books are quite popular. One thing, if I can be slightly flippant, and one thing which sort of is a common theme running across all of them, is something which is being described better by this great, who I think is a great public intellectual of India, Pratap Bhanu Mehta. He, I remember once said in one of his tweets on one of these books, he said, I want to join the IAS one day, and I want to spend 35 years in civil service, and after retirement, write about how I should reform the governance of India. So a lot of these books are in the category of how will I reform the system now that I have retired. So whereas the UK books are less of this category. They are not explaining away their faults. I think they accept mea culpa, my fault, a little more than the Indian civil service categories that I have read.
Just to add to that,
I was going to conclude.
yeah. See, the thing is that we are restricting ourselves only to autobiography. I think we should move beyond that. Because there are many books written by officers.
I was actually basically coming to that, and especially, the technocrats, that's kind of who have done the lateral entry. So many of them are basically, writing books like Sanjeev Samyal. He's writing a number of books, and in fact, one of my friends is currently ambassador in Argentina, Dinesh Bhatia. So he has written a very nice book on Delhi Quran, which Bloomsbury has published. And there are sitting bureaucrats also, basically, who are writing a number of books. Manju Chatterjee, if you remember, he had written a beautiful, wonderful book. Okay. So there has been this thing. So I think there are more takers for such books which are generalized. This thing, and they are able to also reflect a lot of experience which they had in the service, not so directly but indirectly. So fiction seems to be scoring over non-fiction when it comes to bureaucrats writing books. So what's your
So, the thing is that again the impression amongst those people in the country is that bureaucrats and creativity don't go together. I mean, bureaucracy means centralization, it means
Actually, वो
rigidity.
बहुत serious दिखते हैं.
It means conforming to a particular set of rules and regulations. Creativity is the reverse. So how can a bureaucrat be creative? So that's the basic riddle puzzle that people are confronted with. The thing is that some of the best writers, some of the best painters, some of the best singers are from bureaucracy. In the income tax department, for example, people are shocked to know that people actually write and they paint and they recite poetry and sing. But it happens. And it happens, there are various reasons why it happens. Your work is so tiresome, it is so unpopular, it is so dry that the only outlet people sometimes feel is by giving urge to their, yielding to their creative juices, creative urges. So that is one venting out. So various reasons why they write, and we have, for example, in the tax department, we have what's called a Central Revenue Supports and Culture Board, which facilitates, which encourages creative writing. We have various literary workshops. People are called outsiders are called who are excellent in the field. And then we have these workshops 3-4 days. Tom Morris has come for some of them. Other officers have also come and interact with our own officers. So it's something that all the government departments take seriously. Fostering, encouraging cultural, literary, and supporting activities is important. Because you can't be a bureaucrat all the time. You have to also come out of that mold and do what you can do and tell the people what you care about.
Sudha ji, Krishnan ji, and then Vijay also. I find, I wanted your view on this, that I think you must have read My Frozen Turbulence in Kashmir by Ajay Mankotia. So, I found that to be, one of the ideal books in terms of a bureaucrat, penning his experience, also the way, he goes back to the history of Kashmir. And in that, of course, it was a trip about self-redemption also to some extent. But at that point of time when this book had come, so it had a wealth of information. Like as a young journalist, I had read that before going and covering Kashmir. So it was a wealth of information how the bureaucracy is working there. And so how do you rate, basically these kind of books? And do you find, if I may ask you that the books written by bureaucrats, which you find, can be the kind of benchmarks for those who want to, write further, whether it is, autobiographical, whether it is fictional, whether it is semi-fictional, non-fictional. So, any recommendation you would have or any choice you would have, especially, and your comment if you want to make on this books like My Frozen Turbulence in Kashmir.
I would hesitate to give recommendations about books because, as I said, I have not read too many of civil servants' memoirs. I tend to read more the non-fiction, as Ajay just said. There are several people in services who bring out books on, just fiction, which may be related to their experiences, certainly, but which are set in a much more it's not a direct autobiographical manner. Having said that, it's clear that any book written by a bureaucrat will be able to throw light on some aspect of policy which is as yet not known to the public at large or to a journalist like you who is looking for answers or looking for reasons why something happened. That's by very nature of the fact that the bureaucrat has access to documents, discussions, interactions, and therefore knows and understands the history of issues, the background, Kashmir for instance, or in the case of Subhash Garg's book, which Krishnan just spoke about, economic policy making. Definitely, a bureaucrat has access to all this information and may choose to share some of it through his or her book, which will throw light on matters that you are interested in. But there is another sort of a side to it, which I think Krishnan may like to touch upon, which is how appropriate is it to do this? So I'm going to hand over the mic here.
Thanks. So, the part relating to, let's say, Slumdog Millionaire, written by a friend of mine, we all know the person, because excellent work of fiction, individual's view. Likewise, Professor B. N. Goswami, who passed away recently, his books on the paintings of what is that school?
Indian Hardy School, but I hesitate to call him a bureaucrat because he left the IAS very early. He quit within the first 3-4 years. But yes, he joined the service.
So I think the point is, the first point I made naturally, which is early on, it's a selection from the same society. You know, I'm sure independently of his income tax related experience, there is Ajay the person. Ajay the person may be a great poet, he may be a great Rangoli expert, which has nothing to do with his being an income tax practitioner today or an income tax officer earlier. So I think all of us have an individual side to ourselves, which will come out in the case of us, as a singer, as a Rangoli expert, or as a book writer. That in itself is, I think, not very interesting because it's a natural distribution of talents in people. But on the part relating to civil servants, writing about their civil service life, I have sort of mixed views. A lot of it is actually negative views, which is the experience that is really likely to be of great interest, say to you or to an audience, is experience that I got because of my privileged position. And to give a personal example, because it's best to give examples that I'm most familiar with, I was secretary of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Precisely because I was in that position, I got to sit in on meetings where Dr. Manmohan Singh was talking to Dr. C. Rangarajan about what is happening in the Reserve Bank of India. There are differences between the Reserve Bank of India and the then Finance Minister, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee. Should we be doing this? Should you be advising the government to do this? Or should you be advising the Finance Minister to be doing this? Now, I was present there precisely because of the position that I held, and it is privileged communication. Should I be betraying that confidence? Because I'm sure a lot of that conversation would not have been held so candidly if they knew I was going to go back and write a newspaper column or an autobiography. Exactly like transparency has a public interest value, I think in some of these positions, confidentiality also has a public interest value. So, a lot of my experience would not have been my experience if I was known to be you, namely, let's say a journalist. They would not be so candid. So, my personal preference, and it's a personal preference, I'm sure there are as many views as there are people. Ideally, I should not be writing about a lot of these conversations, which I had the privilege to be a part of because of the positions that I held. And minus those experiences, my life is as uninteresting as that of any other person. So, therefore, I don't think I should write.
So I just add to that.
Which is why we haven't written.
Which is why one hasn't written.
People must also know what you can write and what you can't write as per rules. If you want to write anything, a senior officer, ED officer, Intelligence Bureau, RAW, and some other agencies, CRPF, CISF, you cannot write about their activities unless you get approval from the head of that organization. Similarly, what he very rightly said, if you're privy to certain conversations which are assumed to be confidential in nature, and I mean, that's a very premise that you are attending a meeting, all those communications are privileged, are confidential. You're not supposed to betray the confidence of ministers or colleagues and then reveal them later. That's a very, very bad faith. So, having said that, these are the rules that we follow. Now, when you're in the service, you still write. I mean, if you're writing, say, on income tax, I'll have to get it approved by my senior. If I'm writing on the domain knowledge. If I'm writing on fiction, then there's no need for any such approval. So, this is the landscape regarding commissions and what should and what should not be written, and which I think people should be careful of and know about.
So I will have the last question. The छात्रों तीनों लोग ही इसके comment करें. See, now the way things are moving, like you have written a very subject-specific kind of thing where you have kind of tried to demystify the tax-related issues. Now, as we are becoming more and more data-driven, administration and society, now there are a lot of grey areas which are emerging. For example, the data protection issues. Then there are a lot of IT-related issues, social media-related issues. And now, especially, also, there are a lot of patent-related issues. And people who are working in that position have a better understanding of, for example, let's say they take the issue of GM crops. So there are, very polarized views on that. Bureaucrats who are working there, they have to do a fine balancing, and they understand the issue holistically from all sides. So, do you see the need of, these kind of, books being written where you may say they are primers or this thing, breaking down, or demystifying these issues so that, common people or the practitioners in those areas can get benefit from that?
So, let me speak about my own field. Everyone here has absolutely wrong conceptions about CR rate, income tax rate. They all have their own perception of. Now, the thing is that one of the things that I written in the book is how are rates organized. It's not a secret thing. We have manuals, we have things which are in public domain, but nobody knows about them. Rates can't be organized on a whim. You can't rate somebody or you don't like his face or you done something to you. There's full procedure. You receive information, you verify it, you check it with the returns, check it with the other institutions. If there's a concealment, if there's evasion, then you actually go out and see for yourself. The various branch offices, his residences, his godowns. Once you're satisfied that everything is there as per the information received, not being declared, then you write down what's called a satisfaction note. It is then approved by the seniors, and then you do a rate. Rate is a very serious business, done rarely, it's not done daily, and done on the basis of very, very valid information which has been checked by you. So these are the kind of things which I want to highlight, that this is what happens, and what are your rights, what are your responsibilities. The charter which has been again issued by the government. So you must know when they come what to do, and you must also do what is supposed to be done by you, expected of you, so that everything proceeds smoothly.
I have a slightly different take on it. So I belong to the Audit and Accounts Service. First of all, I think if I were to write anything either on audit or accounts, not a single person sitting over here would be interested. Hecking, I don't think anybody wants to know कि accountant क्या करता है, auditor क्या करता है. ठीक है? That's a different matter. Supposing I were to write a book, I wouldn't write it because I believe, as a government officer, one of the first things that has been drilled into my head when I joined service is a code of conduct and an official secrets act, to which I am obliged to be. I'm bound by that, not just when I was in service, but for the rest of my life. Because it is, as we just discussed, that is the framework within which I am given access to documents, meetings, discussions, interactions. And that's not good. that's how the internal functioning of government happens. So a lot of things, say for instance, how a raid is done, or how an audit is planned and done, these are internal instructions, right? And they are all contained in manuals, instructions, circulars of my department, and which are clearly marked for internal circulation only. I believe it's wrong on my part to take that and make it available to the general public, either for purposes of education or for purposes of self-justification or redemption, as you said. So if I were to write a book about, say, audit or accounts, I would like to do it with reference to material that is publicly available. That's in the public domain. Okay? That may not be very interesting, but I can put together, say, constitution, other acts, other reports, audit reports or accounting numbers that are placed in the public domain. As all of you know, the CAG's audit reports, the CAG's accounts are placed before houses of parliament and state legislatures. They are public documents. I have access to that. And I can use that data, I can use that information, and maybe I can, if I were really to write a book, maybe I can use that to explain to any people who are interested how to read the union budget. What are the numbers you should be looking for? What is there between the lines that is interesting to me and may be interesting to you? But I think I would do it with publicly available information.
No, so just to clarify what you just said, all these things are in the public domain only, but people are not aware. So you just bring it to light and you bring it to the forefront. This is what is done, this is what your rights are, this is what your responsibility.
Somewhat similar to sort of quickly supplement. I write a regular column in the Business Standard. I write a monthly column. My 40th column got published day before yesterday. It is, none of my columns is about B-Star Paya DM Alawa. It's none of that stuff. For instance, my last column is on current air quality index in Delhi. What potentially could be better ways to handle the Delhi air pollution. And it is exactly what you said, namely, my 37 years plus in government has given me a certain window into how does government function without betraying any confidence, without violating any of the rules, etc. I believe we could approach Delhi's air pollution in a slightly better fashion than has been done till now. So entirely drawing upon publicly available information, I have written a column on what is the kind of coordination that is required across not only local governments, including international cooperation that is required to solve the problem of Delhi's air quality. And that kind of stuff I write regularly, and I think that's something which a lot of bureaucrats are potentially capable of doing and should do.
So I will open the floor for questions. So अगर आप में से कोई anybody wants to ask a question, चलिए, good. All the questions have been answered. Please.
Sir, this is for Dr. Krishnan. I heard your podcast on Seen and Unseen. It's an 8-hour-long podcast, very interesting. So, if we transcribe that podcast, maybe it will come out to 60,000-70,000 words, right? So, it's a small book per se. So, do you think, are we moving from books to a podcast culture right now in academic space or just a general executive space? Do you think it's a great...
I would add to this, because I see a lot of, especially on KNI. You see Sudha Krishnan doing a lot of podcasts of, especially ex-bureaucrats also. So, I would add to it in the sense that the podcasts are there, books are also there. So, is it a parallel stream basically which is studying, or do you see one stream, kind of replacing the other stream? Because I am an ardent, probably it's my bias also, that as an author, that I believe that books are going to stay there. But overall, how do you see this?
So I'm very unfamiliar with that media. As part of my Center for Public Policy, CPR, Center for Policy Research, where I'm an honorary research professor, as part of our 50-year celebration, there were a few podcasts on work that I have done and written about. It's on the Indian Civil Service. So thereafter, Amit reached out to me. I resisted that for over a year and a half. I finally did it recently, and I'm still a skeptic because I don't know this media. But youngsters tell me that I'm hopelessly outdated, and very soon there will be nothing called a printed book. I am more with you. I think there will be books, but I find podcasts an interesting medium. There again, my entire struggle was, how do I do what I have described? I do not want to betray confidences. I do not want to violate, of course, the formal law as well as the informal compact. And yet, is there something useful that you can do in terms of writing or saying? That is my answer.
I'll just add to that.
I just want to add a question to this.
So just one. I wrote a book called Bollywood Odyssey. It's on Hindi film music. This is now turning into a podcast and also being now serialized by one radio station. So because such kind of books are fine the way they are, but they add more value if they are actually spoken and they are sung. So that's where the podcast helps.
I just want to add to this. I think the difference is basically when you are doing a non-fictional kind of a stuff, then podcasts can be really tricky, and especially when they are being done live, because you don't have to the opportunity to retrieve. Yeah. So I just wanted your views on this thing, both of you, to speak on this thing. That given the thing, like you would prefer to go, especially you're talking about service matters, you would like to go more on podcasts, given the fact that podcast is going to have a huge impact, and you do want to make an impact, basically, not in terms of your own thing, but to bring that subject closer to a lot of people. So, how do you see this, these new mediums, and how comfortable bureaucrats of your generation are with these?
So, you're asking the wrong person the question, because I have neither done podcasts nor written a book. I am just sort of listening to the two of them. But yes, I believe that the electronic media and podcasts, etc., they are a game changer. And they will reach out, YouTube, podcast, whatever you say, they are going to reach out to an audience that books, unfortunately, may not be able to reach out to. Yes, I am old school, I prefer a printed book in my hand. But I see my children, and I'm sure many of the youngsters who are sitting in this room, if they want to learn something, they go to YouTube, or they listen to a podcast. Book कौन खरीदेगा? आप पहले बुक को खरीदो, उसके बाद उसको पकड़ के लेके जाना पड़ेगा, जहाँ भी जा रहे हो, आपके बैग में डालना पड़ेगा, वो तो वेट ज़्यादा है, फिर उसको निकाल के you forget कि मैं which page was I at, उसके लिए पेपर चिपकाना पड़ेगा वहाँ पे. Podcast is so much easier. And everybody has access to internet now. Fun is so widely available. The podcast is a dynamic, very, very powerful tool. And if, say, as you said, if I would like to, say, explain something about budget, or the way in which accounts are prepared, or the way in which a particular scheme of the government is structured, and somebody wants to know, say somebody who's preparing for the civil service, if they wish to know, a podcast is the way to go. I don't think the written book has that reach that the electronic media has. So we are not comfortable with it because we are all old school, we are old generation. But all of you are very, very comfortable with it. And if we want to reach out and if you want to sort of listen to whatever we have to say, I think we will have to learn how to do the podcast route. I completely agree with you. Yes.
Closing remarks.
Well, so bureaucrats, like in any other walk of life, they've also created people. They've also written huge volume, huge number of books on various subjects. The painters, they are singers, People in our service have also awarded the side that we want to of them. So, but again, you still have to be mindful of the fact that there are certain things which are explicitly banned, certain things which are expected not to be revealed because of the conduct rules and expectation of confidence from you. So, as long as you're mindful of that, we speak of the larger issues at hand rather than the specifics and the nuts and bolts, so that people understand exactly how these schemes work, the various ministries function. And I think it's
ठीक है, तो we'll end this session, and thanks to all the panelists for taking out time and the audience also for being there. So I hand it over.
So before we conclude, I would just like to thank all of you for giving me insight and as Dr. Krishnan rightly said and gave us the insight and pointed about the fact that how the autobiography is written by his colleagues, and especially the one we mentioned about Subhash Chandra Bose, we also make policies, and also the way they approach is like how to make reforms after somebody has retired. So that gave the insight of both positive and negative aspect of what you said. And I would also like to mention about Sudha ma'am. She still is into that question that why are people interested to read about the bureaucrats? I could figure that out. That you're still into that question, and the answer was also given by you only, that the example what you gave, that will fail. That surely is a story, an inspirational story, but a lot of people might take it that coming from a bureaucrat might definitely inspire them and help them. So I think that should be your inspiration to write a book on such topics. And definitely I would like to talk about Ajay sir. I would like to talk about Ajay sir. We agree with you sir totally that bureaucrats and creativity certainly go together. Like the people have the other aspect. And so you definitely gave one example. You yourself are one example of that, since you have written a book totally different from the way what you professionally do. So thank you for bringing light that bureaucrats do have creative juices. We totally agree with that. So sir has already written books, like he just showed about the Bollywood policy, and definitely we would love to read more books and new books from Dr. Krishnan and Sudha ma'am as well. So that's all from our side. And
what is the next year?
yes, that should be the council, and that is what we are expecting.
Just one correction.
Yeah.
Podcast.
Okay, fine. So before we conclude today's event, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to our remarkable and interesting speakers. And I would also like to thank the heartfelt thank you to our esteemed moderator who made this discussion a bit interesting. Thank you from our side, and thank you for the lovely audience. Thank you everyone.